The dense forest buzzed with life, the sound of chirping creatures blending with the rustle of the wind. Draven trudged through the underbrush, his boots crunching against the soil. He adjusted the scanner strapped to his wrist, its screen flashing faint readings of an unknown energy source. His mission was simple: investigate the crash site of an alien ship that had landed near Earth's equatorial belt. Simple missions, however, rarely stayed simple. As he approached the crash site, Draven noticed something peculiar. The remnants of the ship were surprisingly small, compact and sleek, unlike the bulky crafts humans typically sent to space. Blackened metal and strange markings adorned the wreckage, glinting faintly in the sun. The scene was eerily silent, the forest seeming to hold its breath. "Big guy, you're late." Draven froze. The voice was sharp and melodic, carrying an accent he couldn't place. He turned, scanning the area, but saw no one. Up here, lumbering giant. Draven's gaze snapped upward, and there she was, a figure perched on the branch of a tree. She couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall, her lithe frame clad in silver armor that shimmered like liquid light. Her skin had a faint iridescent hue, catching the sunlight in a way that made her look otherworldly. Her large, almond-shaped eyes sparkled with mischief, and a small smirk curved her lips. What are you?" Draven demanded, stepping back instinctively. The alien hopped down effortlessly, landing lightly on her feet. "I'm Saren of the Valens," she said, crossing her arms. "And you?" "Some sort of oversized tree creature." Draven's brows furrowed. "I'm human," he said, his voice tinged with irritation. "And I'm here to investigate your crash." Saren raised an eyebrow, her smirk widening. "Human, huh? You're big. Do all humans look like you? Or did they send the largest one as a threat?" Draven resisted the urge to roll his eyes. "I'm not here to threaten you," he said. "Are you injured?" "Do I look injured?" Saren shot back, gesturing to herself. "The ship's in worse shape than I am. And if you're here to help, you're late." Draven bit back a retort. He wasn't used to being talked down to, especially not by someone half his size. "Look," he said, trying to keep his tone calm, "I need to report back on the condition of your ship. Are there others with you?" Saren's playful demeanor faltered for a moment. "No," she said softly. "I was the only one aboard. It was a reconnaissance mission." Draven nodded, noting the brief flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "All right," he said, his tone softening. "Then let's get to work. We need to figure out if we can salvage anything." Saren tilted her head, studying him. "Fine," she said. "But try to keep up, big guy." The next few hours were a flurry of activity. Saren moved with a grace that seemed almost impossible, darting through the wreckage and examining fragments of the ship. Draven, on the other hand, struggled to keep up, his larger frame not built for the quick, agile movements Saren made look effortless. "You're slow," Saren teased, tossing a small piece of the ship's hull to him. "Do all humans move like that? Or are you special?" Draven caught the piece and frowned. "I'm not slow," he said defensively. "You're just unnaturally fast." Saren laughed, the sound bright and musical. "Unnaturally fast. I'll take that as a compliment." Draven shook his head, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips despite himself. There was something oddly endearing about her confidence, and her relentless teasing. As the sun began to set, casting the forest in hues of gold and amber, Draven and Saren paused to rest. They sat on a fallen log near the wreckage, the tension between them easing into a tentative camaraderie. "Why were you teasing me earlier?" Draven asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Saren looked at him, her smirk returning. "Because it's fun," she said simply. "You're different from what I expected." Draven raised an eyebrow. "Expected?" Saren shrugged. "Humans have a reputation among my people. Big, clumsy, overly serious. And you're big, clumsy, and overly serious." Draven chuckled despite himself. "And what about you? Valens have a reputation too, you know." "Oh." Saren leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "Do tell." "They're supposed to be stoic, disciplined warriors," Draven said. "Not mischievous." Saren laughed again, the sound carrying through the quiet forest. "Maybe I'm an exception." Draven smiled, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease. For the first time since meeting her, he found himself genuinely curious about the alien warrior sitting beside him. As night fell, the two of them worked together to set up a temporary shelter near the crash site. The forest came alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, and the faint glow of bioluminescent plants illuminated their surroundings. "Do humans always work so hard?" Saren asked as Draven finished securing the last beam of their makeshift shelter. Draven shrugged. "When there's a job to do, we do it." Saren tilted her head, studying him. "Maybe you're not so bad after all, big guy." Draven chuckled, the sound low and warm. "Maybe you're not so bad either, Pocket Warrior." Saren's eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely surprised. Then she burst out laughing, the sound echoing through the forest. "Pocket Warrior? Oh, I'm keeping that one." As they settled in for the night, Draven couldn't help but feel a strange sense of anticipation. Saren was unlike anyone, or anything, he had ever met. And despite her teasing, there was a spark between them that he couldn't ignore. Little did he know, this was only the beginning. The morning sun painted the forest in soft hues of gold, casting long shadows across the ground. Draven stirred awake to the sound of rustling leaves. As his eyes adjusted to the light, he spotted Saren perched on a low branch above him, nibbling on a peculiar fruit. Her small frame seemed perfectly balanced, and her iridescent skin shimmered faintly in the sunlight. "You humans sleep like hibernating beasts," she teased, tossing the fruit core aside. "I was beginning to think I'd have to leave you behind." Draven groaned, running a hand through his hair. "Good morning to you too," he muttered. "Do Valens ever stop talking?" "Not when there's fun to be had," Saren replied, grinning. As much as her constant jabs annoyed him, Draven couldn't deny the strange sense of amusement she brought. There was a spark in her that made the alien world he'd found himself in feel a little less daunting. The day's task was straightforward, or so it seemed. They needed to scout the surrounding area for supplies and locate the energy source his scanner had picked up the previous day. Saren led the way, moving with a grace that reminded Draven of a predatory cat. He followed behind, careful not to disturb the fragile peace of the forest. "You're awfully quiet today," Saren remarked after a while. "Finally running out of things to say?" Draven smirked. "I was letting you enjoy the sound of your own voice." Saren laughed, a musical sound that made Draven's lips twitch upward despite himself. "Careful, big guy," she said. "You're starting to sound like you enjoy my company." "Don't get ahead of yourself," Draven replied, though the warmth in his tone betrayed him. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the terrain grew more challenging. Thick roots twisted across the ground, and the air grew heavy with humidity. Saren, of course, seemed unaffected. She leapt over obstacles with ease, occasionally glancing back at Draven with an amused expression. "Need help, lumbering giant," she called out, her tone dripping with mockery. Draven gritted his teeth. "I'm fine," he said, stepping over a particularly large root. "Just focus on the mission." Saren's laughter echoed through the trees. "Oh, I am. But watching you stumble around is part of the fun." Draven rolled his eyes, though he couldn't help but chuckle. Her teasing, as irritating as it was, had a strange way of lightening the mood. By midday, they stumbled upon a clearing where the energy readings were strongest. At the center of the clearing stood a massive crystal, its surface pulsing with a soft blue light. It emitted a low hum that resonated through the air, sending a chill down Draven's spine. "This is it," he said, pulling out his scanner. "The source of the signal." Saren approached the crystal cautiously, her expression serious for once. "This isn't just any crystal," she said, her voice low. "It's a shard of Valen technology. We use them to power our ships." Draven glanced at her. "Can you use it to fix your ship?" Saren hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "Maybe. But removing it could be dangerous. The energy it emits can destabilize the environment if not handled properly." Draven nodded, respecting her expertise. "Then we'll do it together," he said. "Carefully." Saren glanced at him, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "You're not as clueless as I thought, big guy." "Don't get used to it," Draven replied, smirking. Working together, they carefully extracted the crystal from its resting place. The process was slow and meticulous, requiring both strength and precision. Draven admired how focused Saren became, her teasing demeanor replaced by a quiet determination. Hold it steady, Saren instructed, her hands glowing faintly as she manipulated the crystal's energy. Almost there. Draven obeyed, his muscles straining as he held the crystal in place. You know, he said, gritting his teeth, you could at least say please. Saren glanced at him, a smirk tugging at her lips. Why? Does the big, strong human need validation? Draven chuckled despite himself. Forget I said anything. With a final pulse of energy, the crystal came free. Saren let out a relieved sigh, cradling the shard in her hands. We did it, she said, her voice tinged with pride. Draven smiled, wiping sweat from his brow. Not bad, pocket warrior. Saren shot him a playful glare. You're lucky I like you. The journey back to their makeshift shelter was quieter, the weight of the crystal forcing them to focus. When they finally arrived, the sun was beginning to set, casting the forest in hues of orange and pink. They placed the crystal in a secure spot and sat down to rest. You know, Saren said after a moment, you're not as bad as I thought. Draven raised an eyebrow. Is that a compliment? Don't let it go to your head, Saren replied, smirking. But you're not just some clueless human. You're different. Draven felt a strange warmth at her words. You're not so bad yourself, he said. For an annoying alien. Saren laughed, the sound soft and genuine. I'll take that as a compliment. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Draven and Saren sat in comfortable silence, their differences feeling less like barriers and more like threads connecting them. For the first time, Draven began to see the possibility of something more between them, a bond that could bridge the gap between their worlds. Section 3. Cultural Exchange. The next morning, the forest was alive with a symphony of chirping creatures and rustling leaves. Draven stretched and blinked against the early sunlight filtering through the trees. Across their makeshift shelter, Saren was already up, her silver armor catching the light as she inspected the crystal shard. You're up early, Draven remarked, his voice groggy. Unlike humans, I don't need as much sleep, Saren replied, not looking up. Besides, I wanted to make sure this shard remained stable. You have no idea how fragile it is. Draven chuckled softly. You really think humans are clueless, don't you? Saren finally looked at him, her lips curving into a teasing smile. Not all of you. Just most. Draven shook his head, suppressing a grin. Despite her constant teasing, there was a growing warmth in her presence. The days they'd spent together had softened the initial tension, and something unspoken lingered between them. As they prepared for the day, Saren suddenly stood and stretched, her small frame surprisingly commanding. You've seen a lot of me, big guy, she said, her tone playful. But I don't know much about your people. How about a trade? I'll show you a Valen tradition if you tell me about something unique to humans. Draven raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Deal. But you go first. Saren nodded, her expression turning serious. In my culture, we believe in honoring the stars that guide us. Every Valen learns a celestial dance. It's a way of connecting with the universe and showing gratitude. A dance? Draven asked, his tone skeptical. Don't underestimate it, Saren said with a smirk. It's not just moving around. It's about balance, energy, and precision. Watch. Saren stepped into the open space, the soft light of the morning casting her in a surreal glow. She began to move, her motions fluid and deliberate. Her feet barely seemed to touch the ground as she twirled and leapt, her arms creating intricate patterns in the air. The dance was mesmerizing, graceful yet powerful, like the movements of a star in orbit. Draven watched, captivated. He'd seen plenty of impressive things in his life, but nothing like this. When she finally stopped, her iridescent skin shimmering faintly, Draven found himself at a loss for words. Well, Saren asked, her hands on her hips. What did you think? Draven blinked, then smiled. I think I'm glad you didn't make me try it. Saren laughed, the sound rich and full of life. Smart answer, big guy. Now it's your turn. Draven leaned back against a tree, thinking. All right, he said after a moment. Humans have this thing called storytelling. It's how we share our history, our lessons, and our dreams. Sometimes, we use it to explain the things we don't understand. Stories. Saren asked, her curiosity piqued. We have those too. What makes yours special? Draven grinned. It's not about what makes them special, it's about how they make you feel. Let me show you. He cleared his throat, then began weaving a tale about a brave human explorer who ventured into the unknown and discovered an alien civilization. The story was filled with danger, triumph, and the unshakable belief that differences could be bridged with understanding. As he spoke, Saren listened intently, her large eyes reflecting the shifting emotions in the story. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Saren smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made Draven's chest tighten. Your people have a way with words, she said quietly. I can see why you value storytelling. Draven nodded, his gaze lingering on her. And I can see why your people dance. It's beautiful. Saren's cheeks flushed faintly, the iridescent hue of her skin deepening. You're not so bad, human, she said, her voice softer than usual. The rest of the day was filled with moments of quiet connection. Saren taught Draven a few simple Valen phrases, laughing at his clumsy pronunciation. In return, Draven shared human songs, humming the melodies as Saren listened with a mix of fascination and amusement. At one point, they stumbled upon a patch of glowing flowers, their petals emitting a soft, golden light. Saren crouched down to inspect them, her expression one of awe. These remind me of the Lyra blossoms on my homeworld, she said. They bloom under the twin moons. They're beautiful, Draven said, kneeling beside her. Like you. Saren looked up sharply, her eyes wide. For a moment, she seemed caught off guard. Then she smirked, though there was a faint blush on her cheeks. Careful, big guy, she said. You're starting to sound sentimental. Draven chuckled, though his heart raced. Maybe I am. As night fell, they returned to their shelter, their bond stronger than ever. They sat by the fire, the crystal shard resting safely nearby. The flames cast flickering shadows across their faces, and for a moment, the weight of their mission seemed to lift. Draven, Saren said softly, her tone unusually serious. Thank you. For what? Draven asked, surprised. For seeing me. Not just as a Valen or an alien, but as me. Draven met her gaze, his expression gentle. You're easy to see, Saren. You shine brighter than anything else out here. Saren smiled, her eyes glistening faintly in the firelight. You're not so bad, big guy, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As they sat there, the distance between them seemed to vanish, replaced by a connection that transcended species and worlds. For the first time, they weren't just a human and an alien. They were two souls finding each other in the vastness of the universe. The forest had a different feel that morning. The air was heavier, and the usual chatter of wildlife seemed muted. Draven adjusted the straps on his gear, scanning the area with a sense of unease. Beside him, Saren moved with her usual grace, but there was a new tension in her posture. Something feels off, she said quietly, her large eyes scanning the horizon. Draven nodded. I noticed. Could be the shard's energy drawing attention. Saren frowned, her lips pressing into a thin line. If that's true, we need to secure it and finish repairs as soon as possible. We can't risk letting it fall into the wrong hands. Agreed, Draven said. Let's split up for now. Cover more ground. Saren hesitated. Are you sure you can handle yourself, big guy? Draven smirked, his confidence masking a flicker of doubt. I think I'll survive, pocket warrior. Her lips twitched into a small smile before she nodded. Stay alert. Draven ventured deeper into the forest, his senses heightened. Every rustle of leaves and crackle of twigs set him on edge. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. His scanner beeped faintly, picking up faint energy traces nearby. As he approached a clearing, he stopped in his tracks. The ground was scorched, and strange, clawed footprints marred the soil. Draven crouched, examining the marks closely. They were large, too large for any animal native to the region. Great, he muttered under his breath. As if this mission wasn't complicated enough. Meanwhile, Saren moved with the precision of a predator. She leapt from branch to branch, her senses attuned to the forest's rhythms. She reached a vantage point and scanned the area, her sharp eyes catching movement in the distance. It was subtle, but it was there, a shadow slipping between the trees, too large and deliberate to be an animal. Her heart quickened. Someone, or something, was following them. The two regrouped at their shelter, their expressions grim. "Something's out there," Draven said, showing Saren the images he'd captured on his scanner. "Footprints. Big ones." Saren nodded, her own findings confirming his. "I saw movement. Whatever it is, it's not friendly." Draven clenched his fists. "We need to secure the shard. If this thing gets to it—" "It won't," Saren interrupted, her tone firm. "Not while I'm here." Her confidence was reassuring, but Draven couldn't shake the worry gnawing at him. "We should set traps around the perimeter," he suggested. "At least slow it down if it gets too close." Saren nodded. "Good idea. Let's get to work." As they worked side by side, the weight of the situation pressed down on them. Draven admired how focused Saren was, her sharp mind and quick reflexes making her an invaluable partner. Despite the danger, he found comfort in her presence. "You know," Draven said, his tone light despite the tension, "for someone so small, you're pretty intimidating." Saren glanced at him, a smirk playing on her lips. "And for someone so big, you're surprisingly useful." Draven chuckled, the sound easing some of the tension in the air. "I'll take that as a compliment." Night fell, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Draven and Saren sat by the fire, their weapons close at hand. The traps were set, and all they could do now was wait. "Do Valens believe in fate?" Draven asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Saren tilted her head, her eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "Some do," she said. "Why?" Draven shrugged, his gaze distant. "I was just thinking, what are the odds that we'd end up here, together? Two completely different species, from different worlds." Saren's expression softened. "Maybe it wasn't just chance," she said quietly. "Maybe we were meant to meet." Draven looked at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. "You really believe that?" Saren hesitated, then nodded. "I don't know, but I'm glad we did." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Draven's chest tightened, the connection between them growing stronger with each passing moment. The silence of the night was shattered by a sudden, guttural roar. Both Draven and Saren sprang to their feet, their weapons at the ready. The ground trembled faintly as something large moved through the trees. "It's here," Saren said, her voice steady but tense. Draven nodded, his grip tightening on his weapon. "Stay close." The creature emerged from the shadows, its massive form illuminated by the firelight. It was unlike anything Draven had ever seen, towering and grotesque, with sharp claws and glowing eyes. Its gaze fixed on the crystal shard, a low growl rumbling in its throat. "Valen Tech must have drawn it," Saren muttered. "We can't let it get near the shard." Draven squared his shoulders, his pulse pounding. "Then we take it down." The battle was fierce and chaotic. The creature was fast despite its size, its movements erratic and unpredictable. Draven used his strength to keep it at bay, while Saren darted around it with agility, striking with precision. "Over here, ugly!" Draven shouted, drawing its attention away from Saren. The creature lunged at him, its claws slicing through the air. Draven dodged, narrowly avoiding the attack. Saren seized the opportunity, leaping onto its back and driving her weapon into its tough hide. The creature roared in pain, thrashing wildly. Saren held on, her expression fierce as she struck again and again. Draven joined the fray, his weapon delivering powerful blows to its vulnerable spots. Finally, with a final, deafening roar, the creature collapsed. The forest fell silent once more, the only sound the ragged breathing of Draven and Saren. As the adrenaline subsided, Draven turned to Saren, his concern evident. "Are you okay?" Saren nodded, though she looked exhausted. "I'm fine. You?" Draven smiled faintly. Still standing. They stared at each other for a moment, the weight of what they'd just faced sinking in. Without thinking, Draven reached out and rested a hand on Saren's shoulder. "We make a good team." Saren's lips curved into a small smile. "Yeah," she said softly. "We do." As the night stretched on, the bond between them grew stronger, forged in the fire of battle and the shared determination to protect what mattered most. The forest was eerily quiet after the battle, as though the trees themselves were catching their breath. Draven and Saren had dragged the massive creature's carcass to the edge of the clearing, ensuring it wouldn't attract scavengers too close to their shelter. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering light over their weary forms as they finally sat down. Saren leaned back against a fallen log, her usually vibrant energy dimmed. Her silver armor bore scratches from the fight, and her iridescent skin was flecked with dirt and faint bruises. Draven sat beside her, his broad shoulders slumped, exhaustion etched into his features. "You okay?" he asked, breaking the silence. Saren nodded, though her movements were slower than usual. "I'll heal," she said softly, her voice tinged with weariness. "Valens recover quickly." Draven gave a small smile. "Good to know. Wouldn't want my partner in crime down for too long." Saren's lips twitched into a faint smirk. "Partner in crime, huh? I like the sound of that." The firelight danced between them, casting a warm glow on their faces. Draven glanced at Saren, his gaze lingering. Despite her alien features, there was something undeniably captivating about her. The way her skin shimmered faintly, the sharp intelligence in her large, expressive eyes, and the grace with which she moved, it all stirred something in him he couldn't quite define. "You've been quiet," Saren said suddenly, her gaze meeting his. "What's on your mind?" Draven hesitated, then shrugged. "Just thinking about everything. How we got here, how we managed to take down that thing, and you." Saren tilted her head, curiosity sparking in her eyes. "Me?" Draven nodded, his expression serious. "You're not what I expected, Saren. You're fierce, brave, and," he paused, searching for the right words. "You make me want to be better." Saren blinked, her cheeks flushing faintly with a pearlescent hue. "Draven." He held her gaze, his voice softer now. "I've seen a lot in my time, but I've never met anyone like you. You're not just some warrior or alien. You're extraordinary." Saren's eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed at a loss for words. Then, to Draven's surprise, she reached out and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm and steady, her smaller fingers wrapping gently around his. "You're not so bad yourself, big guy," she said quietly, a soft smile gracing her lips. The night deepened, and the fire began to die down, leaving behind glowing embers. Draven and Saren sat closer now, their proximity bringing a sense of comfort. The forest around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the quiet intimacy of their shared space. "Tell me more about your world," Saren said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About the things that make it special." Draven leaned back, his gaze distant as he thought. "Earth is complicated. It's beautiful and chaotic all at once. We have oceans that stretch as far as the eye can see, mountains that touch the clouds, and cities that never sleep." Saren listened intently, her expression soft. "It sounds incredible." "It is," Draven said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "But it's not just the landscapes. It's the people. We're stubborn, passionate, and sometimes we make mistakes. But we also create art, music, and stories that can move even the hardest hearts." Saren's gaze softened further. "You speak of your world with such love." Draven glanced at her, his smile fading slightly. "I used to take it for granted. But meeting you, seeing the way you talk about your people and your home, it's made me realize how much I have to appreciate." Saren's fingers tightened around his, her touch grounding him. "I think you're more connected to your world than you realize." The conversation turned to lighter topics, childhood memories, favorite foods, and embarrassing stories. Saren laughed at Draven's recounting of a failed attempt at cooking, her laughter like music in the stillness of the night. In turn, Draven found himself captivated by Saren's tales of her training as a warrior, her small frame belying the strength and skill she possessed. "You're full of surprises, pocket warrior," Draven said with a grin. Saren smirked, her eyes glinting mischievously. "And you're surprisingly charming for a lumbering giant." They both laughed, the sound warm and genuine, breaking the tension that had lingered since the battle. As the night wore on, the fire dwindled to glowing embers. Saren leaned against Draven's shoulder, her exhaustion finally catching up to her. He didn't move, his arm instinctively wrapping around her to offer support. "This is nice," Saren murmured, her voice drowsy. Draven smiled softly, his gaze fixed on the stars above. "Yeah," he said. "It is." For the first time in what felt like forever, Draven felt a sense of peace. The connection between him and Saren had grown into something deeper, something that transcended their differences. In that quiet moment, under the vast expanse of stars, they weren't just a human and a Valen, they were two souls finding solace in each other. As Saren drifted off to sleep, Draven remained awake, his mind racing with thoughts of what the future might hold. Whatever it was, he knew one thing for certain: he didn't want to face it alone. The first light of dawn spilled across the forest, painting the trees in shades of gold and amber. Draven stirred awake to find Saren still nestled against him, her small frame relaxed in slumber. Her face, usually fierce and alert, was softened by peace, making her look almost fragile. For a moment, he simply watched her, a sense of warmth spreading through his chest. The warrior who had teased him relentlessly, the alien with unmatched grace and determination, was now a vital part of his world. Saren's eyes fluttered open, and she blinked up at him, momentarily disoriented. "Good morning, big guy," she murmured, her voice still heavy with sleep. Draven smiled. "Morning, pocket warrior. Sleep well." She stretched, her movements cat-like. "Better than I expected, considering I was leaning on a human." Draven chuckled. "I'm more comfortable than I look." Saren smirked but didn't argue. Instead, she sat up and gazed at the forest, the light catching the iridescence of her skin. "The shard is stable," she said after a moment. "We should be able to complete the repairs today." Draven nodded, though a part of him wished they could stay in this moment just a little longer. They spent the morning working in unison, their movements fluid and synchronized. The shard, glowing faintly, was carefully integrated into the damaged Valen device. Saren's hands moved with precision, while Draven provided the strength needed to secure the larger components. "Almost there," Saren said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "Just a few more adjustments." Draven handed her a tool, their fingers brushing briefly. The small contact sent a ripple through him, but he said nothing, focusing instead on the task at hand. Finally, with a soft hum, the device came to life. The shard's light pulsed steadily, signaling that it was fully functional. "We did it," Saren said, a note of triumph in her voice. Draven grinned. "Told you we make a good team." As they stood back to admire their work, a low rumble echoed through the forest. Saren tensed, her eyes scanning the trees. "Another one," she muttered, her hand instinctively going to her weapon. Draven frowned, his instincts kicking in. "Stay close." The rumble grew louder, but instead of the menacing roar they expected, a sleek, silver Valen ship emerged from the canopy, its elegant design blending seamlessly with the natural surroundings. It hovered for a moment before descending gracefully to the ground. Saren's face lit up with recognition. "It's one of ours," she said, relief evident in her tone. The ship's door opened, and a group of Valen stepped out, their movements deliberate and their expressions calm. The leader, taller than Saren but still small compared to Draven, approached them. "Saren," the leader said, his voice smooth and authoritative. "We've been tracking your signal. You've done well." Saren inclined her head in respect. "Thank you, Commander. The shard is repaired, and the mission is complete." The commander's gaze shifted to Draven, his expression unreadable. "And this human, he aided you." Saren stepped forward, her tone firm. "Draven is the reason I succeeded. He's resourceful, brave, and loyal. I couldn't have done this without him." Draven felt a rush of warmth at her words, but remained silent, letting her speak for him. The commander studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Then he has our gratitude." The Valens began preparing to leave, their efficiency remarkable. Saren oversaw the transfer of the shard to the ship, her expression a mix of satisfaction and melancholy. Draven watched her, a knot forming in his stomach. He'd known this moment was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. When Saren finally approached him, her usual confidence was replaced by hesitation. "Draven," she began, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. He shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You don't have to say it, Saren." "I know." Saren's gaze dropped, her usual bravado slipping away. "I don't want this to be goodbye," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Draven stepped closer, his large hand gently tilting her chin up so their eyes met. "Then it won't be," he said firmly. "We'll find a way." Saren searched his face, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You're impossible, you know that?" Draven grinned. "You wouldn't like me any other way." The Valens called for Saren, signaling that it was time to leave. She hesitated, her gaze lingering on Draven. Finally, she stepped forward and placed her hands on his chest, her touch warm and steady. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "For everything." Draven placed his hand over hers, his expression earnest. "Take care of yourself, Pocket Warrior. And don't forget about the big guy who helped save the day." Saren laughed softly, though her eyes glistened. "Not a chance." She turned and walked toward the ship, each step feeling heavier than the last. As she reached the door, she paused and looked back, her gaze locking with Draven's one final time. "Until we meet again," she said, her voice carrying a promise. Draven nodded, his chest tight. "Until then." As the ship ascended into the sky, disappearing among the clouds, Draven stood alone in the clearing. The forest seemed quieter now, the absence of Saren's presence a palpable void. Yet, as he gazed up at the sky, a sense of hope filled him. Their paths had crossed against all odds, and he knew deep down that this wasn't the end. Somewhere out there, among the stars, Saren was thinking of him too. And one day, their worlds would collide again. For now, he carried her memory with him, a reminder that even in the vastness of the universe, connection was possible, and love could bridge the greatest divides. The end.